I've seen a lot of iterations of wall pockets floating around YouTube lately and wanted to try one using clay. I bought this big box of natural clay from Michael's. It was only $13.99 for this 10-pound box, and they have deals pretty often to make it even cheaper. I haven't worked with a natural clay before, and this says it's an air dry clay, not oven bake, so I started working with it like I would any other air dry clay. You can see when I opened it, the clay is very wet. There was water on the plastic. That was a little concerning. I thought maybe this isn't gonna go so well. But I continued because I love testing out new products and things I've never done before to share my experience with you guys so you don't waste your money on something that isn't quite what you thought it would be. When I rolled the clay out on my acrylic mat, it was just stuck to the surface, like the water had suctioned it down. So I tried to sprinkle some cornstarch down. That didn't work. You need to use parchment paper or wax paper to use a clay like this. And I rolled it out into a kind of an ovalish shape. Then using a tissue blade, I cut down 3 of the sides to make them straight. I wanted to add some texture to the clay and have this texture mat. It's double-sided and it came in a pack of 3 with different designs on it, also from Michael's. I'm using the Stone Lake side for the background of this pocket. Then I'm adding a hole to the top to hang it, just using the handle of a paintbrush. Now for the pocket portion, I made a rectangle, and this part was a little tricky. When you add 2 pieces of clay together, you need to score the parts. So I did that, but this clay being so wet to start, it was really difficult to work with. I also needed to put something in between the 2 layers to hold the pocket piece up while it dries. I tried using small paint bottles, but didn't like that there was a dip in the middle. They were also a little too tall and the clay wasn't reaching the sides. So I got a paper towel roll and that worked much better. I squished it down a little so it wasn't so round, and then I blended the sides in using water to help shape the clay and make it all one piece. Like I said, this clay was not easy to work with. I spent a lot of time working at this, trying to make it look nice, and it was starting to crack in some spots, but eventually I just set it aside to dry. I actually like the way the pocket turned out though, with this little ripple on it. Now, me being the perfectionist that I am, I had to try this again with a different clay and a different method. So I got out my Das air dry clay and rolled out a long rectangle. To keep it all the same thickness, I'm using a stack of 3 large craft sticks on either side. This time I used my L roller to help cut the edges. I also did some searching to see what people use to keep the pocket open and saw several videos where they use a foam piece. So I cut down a little styrofoam rectangle and that was perfect. This time I also made the pocket out of 1 solid piece instead of cutting the back and then adding on the front pocket. This method was so much easier, and I did the same thing blending the sides together. To decorate this one, I got out my olive crest mold from IOD and used a few of the filigree pieces, then added them to the pocket and used water to smooth out any areas that were starting to show some cracks. I let the clay dry and it took about 48 hours. Then I painted the decorative one in plaster by Waverly. This color is very close to the color of the clay, but I wanted to fill in some of those small cracks that had formed. And last, I'm taking my bronze gilding wax to bring out those details. If you don't have gilding wax, you can use any type of wax or even dry brush with any color that fits your style. I saw this simple bud vase on Pinterest and thought that looks so easy to recreate. Well, that was deceiving. Now, this one was a complete fail, but I always like to show you guys the things that don't work out. I tried this one 2 different ways as well. First, I used my polymer oven baked clay and rolled it out into a long rectangle and cut the edges. Next, I grabbed a glass jar that I have on hand to form the shape, and I cut a circle out on what would be the top for a floral stem. So far, so good. It's going nice and smooth. I put this on a cookie sheet and into the oven at 275 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 minutes, then turn the oven off and let it cool down. Next, I need to make the little vase part that was on the bottom. So I rolled out some more clay, shaped it how I wanted it to look. The first piece was cooled down now, so I need to attach the little vase to the bottom. It's looking so cute, but a little bit flimsy. I did make it too thin, but it was still working, so I kept going. I put a liquid clay on the vase, which is like a glue, and then I put it back into the oven. I didn't have something to hold up the circle this time, so I did just set it in the oven as is, and that was a mistake. It ended up breaking right in half while it was in the oven, and I'll show you that here in a minute. But I wanted to give it another try because I thought I just made it too thin and that was the issue. So this time I used the natural air dry clay. Rolled it out much thicker, wrapped it around the jar to dry, and again, it's going great. Once it dried, I removed it from the jar and right away it broke. And it broke so easily, I was shocked. Like, it just crumbled. There was no saving it. That was really disappointing. So that idea was scrapped and I was out of time, so on to the next project. This one was inspired by this beautiful clay bowl I found while scrolling through Pinterest, and I'm using the polymer clay for this one. I'm not sure if this technique I'm going to show you would work with air dry clay though. I start making a big cylinder of white clay. Then I'm using this Sculpey clay in the color copper and rolling it out into a thin sheet. To get that colored edge around each clay circle on the bowl, you want to cover the white cylinder with the copper or whatever colors that you choose. When you're working with this type of clay, it gets really warm, and the warmer it is, the more bendable and moldable it is. So I'm going to need to cut this cylinder down, but first I'm going to put it in the freezer for 15 minutes. That will firm up the clay a bit and make it much easier to cut into while keeping its shape. When I took the clay out of the freezer, now I can start cutting it into thin slices to create the circles. Here you can see how each little circle will have that copper outline around it. If the clay starts getting too warm before you're done cutting it, just throw it back in the freezer for a few minutes, then keep going. Once I have all of the circles cut, I want to add texture to them. So to do that, I'm taking a little scrap of burlap and lightly roll it over the pieces. Don't press too hard, but hard enough to see the lines. Next, to make the shape, I grabbed a kitchen bowl and started adding the circles to it. When you add the circles on the bottom, it's no longer going to be flat. So to get a flat surface for the bowl to sit right on a table, I take my rolling pin again and roll over the circles on the bowl. Very lightly. Again, I don't want to distort the shape, I just want to make the bottom flat. Then continue adding the circles on around the sides of the bowl. When they were all on, I put it in the oven at 275 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 minutes and then turned my oven off and let it cool down. I didn't think there was enough circles going up the sides of the bowl, so I made another log cylinder and cut out more to add on and then put it back in the oven. I was determined to make another project with this natural clay and see how it would turn out. Botanical art is everywhere, and I knew this would be a really quick project. So again, I rolled out some clay. I've been getting some comments recently asking about Sarge. He is still right here in the craft room with me. I got him a bed so he can be comfortable while I work, but he is so handsome. Back to the project, I used a Dollar Tree wood square as a template for the tile, and then added holes to hang them with using the end of my paintbrush. I put 2 holes in one square and then 4 holes in the other so I can connect the two together. Next, for the botanicals, I went on my front porch and clipped a few stems from my bridal veil hanging basket to use for the imprint. This is such a beautiful planter. I love how it looks. I laid the stems I cut out on my clay tiles, overlapping a few of the pieces, and then gently rolled over them to press them into the clay. You want to use wax paper here so the stems stay where you want them, but also so they don't stick to your rolling pin. The first one I didn't press down hard enough on the leaves, so they're a little bit less visible, and the second one I pressed down slightly harder. And then I used tweezers to gently lift the stems up off of the clay. Once the tiles were dry, I'm taking this leather ribbon to connect the two together. My holes were not big enough, so I gently made them bigger. Like I said earlier, this clay just crumbles, and you can see it turning into dust so easily. So I made the holes bigger and added the leather. I was being so careful, and then look at that. It broke again. So disappointing. I know this one broke because on the second one I pressed too hard and the stem went through the clay, which I didn't realize that until I was adding the leather and you could see through that spot. But I was able to glue it back together and save it. I would just not recommend this clay, you guys. It is not worth putting in all of that effort for every project to just crumble like this. I'm wondering if I bake it, if that will make it stronger. Maybe someday I'll give that a try, but for now I'm a little bit scarred by this product.